Welcome to the We Talk Careers podcast, brought to you by Women in ETFs. This is Christine Delano, and I'm thrilled you've joined us. If you're pursuing excellence in your own career or intrigued by the hustle required to make it to the top, this podcast is for you. This is season 6, and we are dropping in on leaders across the globe. We're going to learn how to balance, how to speak truth to power, and how to have fun doing it. So put aside that massive to-do list and let's get inspired. Today I'm joined by Kristen Winther, Global Co-President of Women in ETFs. Kristen currently leads the sales operation at TIFIN and has been a trusted leader in the world of ETFs for the past 18 years. Having worked alongside Kristen, I can vouch that she is a spectacular collaborator. In an ecosystem that prides itself on busy and important, Kristen is a responsible leader that makes time for conversations and decision-making. Kristen is married with 2 children, lives just outside of New York City, and I am so pleased to welcome you. Welcome, Kristen, to the We Talk Careers podcast.
Well, thanks, Christine, for the introduction. I'm very, very excited to be here. I've been a fan of the podcast for some time and obviously a member of We for many years, and so I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you today.
Oh, I'm excited to have you on. And so tell us a little bit more about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your career, how you got where you are today, as well as what do you like to do for fun?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really started my career back in 2006, and it was almost an accident, really. I had joined a firm as a temp. It was a trading shop based in Toronto, Canada, where I'm from, and I really was working the front desk where they needed a receptionist. I was sort of right out of college, and this company had a number of subsidiaries in the same building, and through the work that I had been doing with that initial firm, somebody there had recommended me to one of the CEOs in the company that was starting up an ETF firm. And that was really before ETFs were really a thing, right? Obviously, there were some ETF providers, but this was still very early days. And so having met them, they almost just by accident said, come in and do an interview, and gave me a job. I was the first employee into a startup ETF shop, which was at the time called Horizons ETFs and is now Global X Canada. And I worked there for 8 years and really was a great experience because I worked with the 2 co-founders that really provided me a lot of learning opportunities in addition to doing the work. So I got to cut my teeth early days within the ETF environment there. And one day I had talked to our CEO about wanting global exposure. And he said to me, we're actually in the process of potentially going through an acquisition with a firm in Korea. And that, of course, happened in about 2011. And Mirae Asset, who now has a presence in the US and obviously globally, predominantly under the Global X brand again here, they sent me to Korea. So I worked in Seoul for some time, helping to oversee regional alignment across all of their ETF properties in Australia, Korea, Hong Kong, and Canada. And over time, as their plans expanded into organic growth for the ETF business, they sent me to LATAM. So I helped oversee the setup of their Latin American business in Bogota, Colombia, and launch the first products there. And then same in New York. And so that's ultimately how I ended up in New York City. And it's been, really interesting since then. I've worked with another ETF shop called GraniteShares, which was another startup. And I did a couple of years at MSCI, which is obviously a global leading index provider. And most recently, I'm with a company called TIFIN, and TIFIN is a firm that verticalizes AI into wealth management, asset management, and insurance spaces. So after the issuer and ETF side to move over into fintech because it was going to be such a great learning opportunity, but we still work with ETF issuers all the time, which is really fun for me because of my background and experience. So that's really where I am today. I've been, very fortunate, I think, in a lot of the opportunities that I've had, both, within companies, but also globally, which is why I love today's topic. And about me personally, yes, as you mentioned, I live in Westchester, but I'm from Canada originally. I'm married. I've got 2 little kids. In terms of things that I like to do, well, I'm married with 2 little kids, so that takes up a lot of time. But outside of those things, years ago, I had my pilot's license, and I would love to get back into flying planes a little bit more, but that's always been a passion of mine. I certainly like reading. I like cooking. I have a lot of the standard hobbies. Running is another one. I've completed, I won't say ran the New York Marathon twice. I think I hobbled my way through some of it, but I've completed it twice, and that's
But
just
completed,
yeah,
yes.
that's another love of mine. So those are just a few things about me and what I like to do outside of work.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I love for our listeners to be able to get to know our guests in like these round ways. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk to you about collaboration. I feel like you and I have gotten to know each other quite a bit over these last couple of years.
Yeah.
And if anything that we do together, it is collaborate, I
Yes.
would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as we talk about as an organization being stronger together, and as we think about our listeners who are just living in an ecosystem right now where I feel like politics and news stories, it's all about like seeking power, uncompromising directives, all of these things. And you start to see the breakdown of any sort of collaboration where it brings people together to be in it together to make progress and to, in an effort not to sound too cheesy, but like live a better, joyful life. And I feel like we've sort of lost that in the airwaves and the things that we're learning about. So maybe take us through, before we share a story, just tell us a little bit about how you define global collaboration. Like, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think as I think about global collaboration, well, collaboration obviously I think is, taking diverse perspectives and experiences and making space to hear out people with those different perspectives and experiences, right? And not only hearing them, but actively listening to what they have to say, with the assumption that by having those more diverse inputs, that you end up at better outcomes. And I fundamentally believe that that's true. And I think the same, it's really the same concept, whether you're within a country or whether you're global. But I think that it only enhances the diversity of those perspectives when you think about cultures and people that are, in many cases, vastly different in certain areas. But I think it's also important to find commonalities, because when you find those commonalities, I think that's what allows you to communicate better. And I think communication across collaboration is obviously such a fundamental and key piece of getting success through this sort of collaborative method.
Wonderful. So as you think about this, and you really kind of had me at Korea too, which is this idea of you having such a global experience through your career. Any fun or interesting story to kind of talk about when you think about global collaboration?
I always go back to this one funny story about something that a colleague said to me when I was working in Korea. I think I went out for lunch. All the folks I worked with in Korea always went out for lunch. They don't eat lunch at their desk. It's very different in that perspective. But I'd gone out for lunch. I put my sunglasses on. It was a sunny day. And I came back after lunch and I went to my desk. I sat down and I had this colleague come to me and say, you wear sunglasses quite a bit. Some people refer to you as the girl who's wearing the sunglasses. And I thought, am I being weird? I wasn't wearing sunglasses inside, sitting at my desk.
Okay, so you weren't wearing them
No.
when they came up to talk to you about this.
No, I would go outside the building on a sunny day, put on my sunglasses and come back inside and do work. But somehow I had gotten this reputation of being the sunglasses girl. And I said, why is this such an odd thing? And she had said to me, well, in Korea, sunglasses are more of a weekend thing. I thought, okay, fair enough. I didn't know it was only sunny on weekends in Korea, but it was just one of those silly things that you just don't have an appreciation for, or you don't think would ever be noticed.
Right.
But, sometimes it is. And those are the little nuances, and understanding and learning about those nuances, which are, to your point, kind of funny and interesting sometimes, but also give you a sense of how different some of the things, even as benign as they may seem, actually have an impact in how people view you based on the culture that you come from. And I always thought that was such a funny story. I had a good laugh about it. I continued to wear my sunglasses.
Good for you.
Yeah, but nevertheless, I did understand where she was coming from.
Yeah, I guess if you think about it, it's like more of a casual look, right? So if you had somebody from I don't know, say New Zealand coming to visit, and for lunch they put on denim cutoffs, you'd be like, oh, the girl who wears denim cutoffs, right? And it's like, well, I'm not in the office. What does it matter? Sort of. I guess the sunglasses signals casual, we're off work.
That's exactly what it was. It didn't fit within the context of what they viewed as being, I guess, professional or appropriate for office wear. But to me, it just
Right.
seemed so simple, and the two didn't really have anything to do with the other one. So
Yeah, and for me, I've got light eyes, so that would be like really necessary. And for anybody, it's
yeah,
just like a lot of sun, right?
yeah,
Oh, that's
exactly.
funny.
Yeah.
Thinking about this idea of having conversation, being known for something, collaborating with others,
Yeah.
as you thought about this topic, what kind of advice or practical step-by-step do you have for listeners on collaboration?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, right? So collaboration, I think, is important, as I stated, right? And I think that generally, they say if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think it leaves somewhere in the middle. Right. I certainly think that with collaboration, having those perspectives and understanding different perspectives leads to better outcomes. But I think you can also, fall into a trap where you over index on other viewpoints, right? And that fundamentally leads to a place where, almost like analysis paralysis, right? You don't make decisions because you're trying to accommodate too many perspectives and ideas. So I think you have to be able to find this balance around at what point do you say, okay, I have enough information, and now I, as a leader, I'm going to make the decision and act based on those inputs, right? And so I think that to me is important. So as you go about your career and you have these conversations or you have to make these decisions and you get these global inputs, I think always know that it's important to take those inputs, but at the same time, know when it's time to stop and act. And I think if you find that balance, it works really well. In terms of getting that sort of global exposure, that I think is a bit of a different story. To be collaborative and to want to take in different perspectives globally, I think you naturally need to have curiosity. I think that's such an important piece of both of this, whether it's being curious about different regions, different cultures, different languages, whether or not it's, curiosity about different perspectives because people have different upbringings or education or career experiences. I think you need to sort of develop this natural curiosity around these perspectives. And I think that you can flex that muscle, right? So one way to do that might be to find something that you're interested in. So I use examples like food or art. Are there things and differences and similarities you can connect across different perspectives that are interesting to you? Developing that curiosity, identifying something that resonates with you that you can use as you sort of develop an understanding of similarities and differences, I think is interesting. And I think as you do more of that, you learn and can hone in your ability to understand those perspectives better. But I think ultimately from a career perspective, what I would say is you want to be able to identify those opportunities where you can have and build and flex that muscle around global collaboration. And that could mean trying to go for global positions within a firm, right? Taking some initiative to seek out roles and opportunities and perspectives that are different from your own. I can, from my experience, I think that a lot of the reason I got the opportunity to work globally was because I had taken that initiative to try and make that happen for myself. In fact, before I ended up getting the opportunity to move to Korea, I'd self-funded a trip to Asia. I took all of my, my bonus money from that year and I bought plane tickets and I went to Hong Kong and I went to Shanghai and I went to Singapore and knocked on doors, literally from firms that I had known from my career in Canada, talking to friends and colleagues, and sat down with a lot of people to learn more about what career opportunities look like in other parts of the world. And when I came back and had the conversation I referred to earlier with my boss and said, look, I want this global exposure, that's where they said, well, hold on a second, we're right in the middle of this acquisition and we may have a spot for you. So I think taking that initiative to seek out those types of opportunities, I think is hugely important in order to kind of facilitate and again, flex that muscle and become really good at understanding and listening to and leveraging those perspectives into better outcomes.
That's so good, Kristen. I'm going to feed that back to our
Yeah.
listeners for a second. The first one was having a curiosity in regional differences, cultural differences, backgrounds, food, just being curious, which I tell you has been a common theme on this podcast
Yeah.
lately. And it's like, it's actually one of those bellwethers of people finding success in their jobs is whether
Yeah,
they're
I think
curious,
so.
because it really drives so much of why we have some of the opportunities we do. So being curious and then seeking out these differences and similarities, like identifying and being able to hone in and knowing when there's differences and when there's similarities and finding those common grounds, which I think is so good. Having global opportunities and, seeking out, and you said leadership, but I also think maybe it's also any opportunity to be on a team, to be
Yeah.
able to say, hey,
Yeah.
I'll actually do the hard work of that. I'll do the stuff that no one wants to do in order to
Yeah.
sort of find my way into teams that
Yeah.
allow me to be seen as a potential leader if you don't get that
Yeah.
opportunity to sort of lead the team yourself. And
Yeah.
then I really love how you were so opportunistic that you actually took the initiative, went on your own time, really see where you wanted to be, and then came back with a very clear path for yourself that allowed your company to, at that point, you had no idea where they were going with this.
Right.
It could have been that taking you outside the company, or you might have had to wait a little bit longer, but you did it with some experience and intelligence around what you were asking. I think those are such excellent steps for folks to really take notice of. I also really loved how you started, because besides going into these steps, also realizing that sometimes collaboration can take too much time and too much effort to the point where we're not actually coming to any sort of resolution and we're not actually moving forward. If we listen to all the voices, we're never going to please
Yeah.
everybody all of the
Right.
time. And that's why it's really important to sit in high performing teams that do this well, so you can
Yeah.
learn the cadence of how to make these decisions. I actually just sat down with a young woman last week, and she works for a non-financial firm in a marketing position. And she was really struggling with the fact that they were looking to redesign this whole piece. So many voices, they couldn't quite come to any consensus on the way to step forward. And talk to her about that idea of, like, eventually you just have to get on the bus. Eventually a
Right.
direction needs to be chosen. Not everyone is going to be happy, but you're going to do it in this thoughtful way where everyone understands that they have been heard, their ideas have been taken, but collaboration at some point actually needs to come to a solution.
I think there's two key things I think about from that perspective, especially when you're working on teams, right? One is trust, right? I think that you have to be able to trust that you are able to give your feedback, or you're able to give your perspective, and know that it will be respected and appreciated, even if it doesn't end up in the final solution, let's say. But knowing that the people around you value your opinion, and you trust that your team is doing what's best for the objective outcome, right? I think that that's fundamentally important in collaboration. Is like, nobody wants to collaborate with people who don't think that, they're respect their views, for example, right? And I think that's fundamentally important. And the other concept is really around disagreeing and committing, right? Disagree and commit. You can say, look, this is my view and my perspective, and if it's not the solution that's ultimately chosen, you can disagree and state that you disagree, but you must then, I think, as any sort of successful person within a team, commit then to doing your best to deliver whatever the end result is. And I think that's sort of a mark of leadership. And something else is you learn over time as you do more of these things and you work on more collaborative projects. I think those are two things that I think are fundamentally important when working with a team and focusing on
I really like
collaboration.
that concept around being a good global citizen. I know that I had really given some opportunities, some younger people on my teams, to sit in on some larger decision making within the firm.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is that they got to see a lot of contentious conversation, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people with very vested interests. And what I hadn't really prepared them well for, and this was a failing on my leadership, was I was giving them a lot of context. We were, going through how we were going to make a decision on this, like who was able to speak into it. They started to take sides. So the younger folks that I had in there started to echo what
Right.
they were hearing.
Right.
And at that point, a decision had been made, and I'm like, no more. We have to continue to we've chosen a decision, we've chosen a path, and now you need to get on the bus with us. And it's no longer a matter of like, well, I believed this and I believed this. I feel like sometimes we get opportunity to see some of that collaboration in action, which sometimes can look contentious, but recognizing that at a certain point, to be a good corporate citizen and to be seen as a future leader or a current leader, you're going to need to absorb all that and say, yeah, well, the decision has been made and this is the direction we're going.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, again, goes back to trust and radical candor, right? I think in many cases, radical candor is important to get to a good outcome. I think it's important that we challenge each other's ideas respectfully, but I do think the challenge is important. And again, that goes back to perspective, right? And having different perspectives. But knowing, again, I come back to this idea of trust. You have to trust that everybody in the room has the best intention and that you're willing to voice your perspective for what is the best outcome, but that ultimately may not be where we end up. And that, your ego can't be a part of it. Right. I think it's also really important when working in a team and collaboration that if something doesn't go your way, you have to let it go. Right. These things aren't personal. You have to, again, just sort of trust in the bigger picture.
What do you wish you'd known about sort of collaboration and being really good at this when you were early on in your career? I mean, it sounds like you did pretty well navigating this, and it's probably part of your DNA, but anything that, you wish you had maybe done a little differently?
For sure. I don't, personally, I actually don't think I'm a great collaborator by nature. And I think sometimes it's situational, but it's something that I've had to learn over time. And like any skill, I think it can be learned. So even for those of you people who are listening who don't feel that they're great at collaborating or that they're more successful as an individual contributor, that's fine. But even in that role, you will have to work with others. And so, I think it's something that I've had to work at. In terms of, there's lots of things I think I wish I had known earlier or that I've learned. One is around listening more. I think especially when I was younger, had this view that there was a way to do something and I had an objective and goal was the most important thing. And other people's perspectives and how they viewed it were tantamount to that goal. Right. And so I think being able to take a step back, and that certainly rubbed people the wrong way at times, right? Who is this person who's now come in and said, we have to do A, B, and C. This is not how we've done things. But I had my eye on kind of what I felt the results should be rather than listening, I think, to what others had to say and creating friction and not being as successful in getting to our end objective because I was too focused on the wrong thing or not doing a good enough job around bringing people with me or setting appropriate context. And I think that, again, in collaboration or when you work on teams, helping people to understand context is deeply important. So I think listening and context setting are two things that I wish I had done or learned sooner in my career.
I think it's so common, right? I think that it's going to work against you when you are really in an individual role succeeding on a task, right? And so being able to pivot very quickly to, I need to get my head down. I need not to be listening to the noise. I need to be getting it done to, oh, wait, my head's up. I'm looking around. I'm listening, all those things. So I think what you talked about is so common and such an important growth edge for people moving along in leadership in their careers. Any other sort of advice for the next generation of leaders?
That's a really great question. I think some of it I've already stated, which I think is really around being proactive and selective about what it is that you want to do, right? I think that most of the opportunities I've had are not opportunities that have fallen in my lap, but are opportunities that I've actively asked for. And I think that if you advocate for yourself and what you want, and at the same time what you don't want, I think that will put you ahead of actually quite a lot of people. I think there are many people who actually don't communicate that particularly well or feel they have to do something because they've been asked. Being vocal and advocating for yourself in terms of what you want to do is key. And honestly, the only other thing I come back to often when I think about this is hard work, is just hard work. I think one of the things that has been beneficial to me is that I can grind. That I can just sit and grind through work if I need to. And, people often say, get the simple things right. And I agree with that, right? Like show up on time, respond to your emails, do the professional and courteous things that most people would expect as sort of decent. And other than that, get your work done, try, show up, do the job. And that to me is sort of the other thing that I think has always been helpful, is that I will just sit down and do the work.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think you're a really good example of this. And I think that's the reason why we, as well as a few other people in Women in ETFs, have worked so well together, is that there's just this common courtesy that we have of being responsive and working hard and then sharing that with others. I know that I can get myself a little bit annoyed when I don't hear back from someone when I've been, heads down working on things. And it's like, wait, I just need this little bit of information, or I've done all the work. Can you just review this? Yeah. And then I get on my own high horse until I realize that there's this email that I missed in like a flurry of it on something else that was for someone else that I didn't respond to. And then I have to like give everyone grace, including myself, on the fact that, we're not all perfect, but we do try really hard to not only get it done, but also make sure that we're giving enough margin in our lives to be able to help anyone else out who's also working on something else.
Absolutely. I think that's right. We all hold ourselves to high standards, right? And sometimes we expect that from others, but knowing, I think, to your point, nobody's perfect. We're all just trying our best here. And I think that you're right. We have to be reasonable and decent with people and considerate of, again, perspectives. Where are people coming from? What's going on in their lives? We have, I think, especially within Women in ETFs, it's such an amazing opportunity. It's volunteer and people devote so much time and energy to the organization, which I feel deeply lucky to be a part of. And of course, I have a wonderful team who also feels very strongly about the organization and its mission, but it's volunteer. And I think it's important that we, to your point, give each other a little bit of grace as we're navigating so many things throughout the day, including our commitments to be.
I love that you're a reader, because I'm a writer. Yeah. So I am just always a collector of good ideas for books.
Yeah.
So when we started this podcast, we started with always people giving a recommendation on one book. So I love bringing this back for season 6. Give us a recommendation. What are you reading right now or have read recently that you'd love to share with our listeners?
Well, there's 2. I don't know if I'm allowed to break the rules, but one is, because the topic was on global and collaboration, I thought it was timely. So one is Bel Canto by Ann Patchett. I don't know if you've read that one, but wonderful book. It takes place in South American city in the backdrop of a hostage crisis at a vice president's house. And there's a number of different people from all over the globe in this situation, Japan, America, South America, and fundamentally like how they interact with each other in this sort of tense backdrop by learning to communicate and work together despite not speaking the same language, and in this sort of intense situation. And ultimately the story that develops, I think, is really applicable to this topic, but it's really such a wonderful book.
And I love how it went from sort of the big stakes global to like the very personal, right? It's such an interesting, she was able to sort of get both sides of sort of like what makes a really good story.
Absolutely. Well, it's really a great book. And the other one I just picked up. So I'm only a few pages into it, but I'll advocate for it anyway, because it won the 2024 Booker Prize, which is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. So that one takes place on the International Space Station. I guess it's 6 astronauts and cosmonauts from all over the world: Italy, Britain, Japan, Russia. And again, sort of putting all of these different cultures and perspectives into the situation, I think, again, is just so interesting and appropriate for the topic today. So those are the two I was thinking of.
Well, you win for like actually having your books match your topic and be outstanding books. Well done, Kristen.
Yeah, both very good books.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was so great getting to know you more and for our listeners to get to know you too.
Well, thank you for having me. It's such a great topic and such a great podcast. So I'm happy to do it. And thank you for having me.
Thanks again. And thank you, our listeners, for spending your time with us. I hope this is not just information, but you let it be transformational in how you think about your career. I'm rooting for you. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a rating and a review. Your ratings and reviews tell Apple that this is a podcast worth listening to. And in turn, your reviews will help We Talk Careers get in front of more listeners looking to succeed, just like you. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that follow button, because there's going to be another brand new episode and you don't want to miss it. Until then, keep thriving. Thank you for listening.